Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest in studio today is Mr. Jack Estes. He's dedicated much of his time to helping other soldiers with PTSD. He's founded the Fallen Warriors Foundation to bring vets back to Vietnam on humanitarian missions in order to help them to heal. And it permeates his writing. The main character of his brand new novel, A Soldier's Son, is a PTSD suffering father who's trying to keep his son from joining the Iraq War. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Jack.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. You know, you're the author of a brand new book. Now, is this your first book, A Soldier's Son?
No, it's not. I had a memoir based on my experience in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote that many years ago. Re-released it actually a couple of years ago, called A Field of Innocence. And it's kind of like, it tells the story of what I experienced in Vietnam. And this book, A Soldier's Son, tells the story of a veteran many years after the war and what he's experienced. And is experiencing. It really deals a lot with post-traumatic stress disorder by illustrating some of the problems and the thoughts and issues that a veteran has. The main character is Mike Kelly, whose chopper is shot down over the jungles of Vietnam in 1968. His crew is dead. Most of his small team is dead. And he has to make a life-altering decision as the enemy approaches. And then the book picks up in 2004, the beginning of the Iraq War, and Mike's symptoms of post-traumatic stress are coming on full storm, I guess I would say. And so it's causing great conflict in his family. His wife is threatening to leave him unless he goes seek help at the Veterans Hospital and gets back on medication. His daughter doesn't think that Mike loves her anymore, and his son is getting tired of Mike controlling his life. And so the family is starting to implode, and then his son joins the Marine Corps with his best friend, and they are shipped to Iraq. This makes Mike crazy, and he starts thinking about his history more and more, and what's going to happen to his son, and how his son will come home damaged like he is. And finally, he becomes delusional, and he travels to Iraq as an embedded reporter in a desperate attempt to save his son.
You know, as a long sufferer with PTSD, and you're living with it now, who is your target audience? It would seem to me that maybe some of your writing is therapeutic, but are you writing to the person who's got a returning loved one, or are you writing to physicians out there who maybe don't understand how to help some of their potential patients? Talk about your reasoning for writing this particular book.
Well, it's cathartic. Although this is a novel, some of the feelings and sentiments I've had over the decades are expressed. But I really wanted to write something that would illustrate in a profound way how a war impacts on a soldier and his family. And I illustrate some of the examples of post-traumatic stress disorder that, doctors, therapists, psychologists can identify, and how it really takes hold of a veteran, what his thoughts are about these issues, and how a veteran may deal on his own with suicidal ideation. And it also shows how a woman who loves her veteran and encourages him and helps him deal with these issues until finally it becomes untenable. And then once you read the book, you will see that it's generational. The veteran Mike Kelly's father was a tank commander in World War II. And then he was a Marine in Vietnam in some horrible battles. And now his son is a Marine. And Mike is so worried that the delusional thinking that he's had, the behaviors that he's had over the years that reflect post-traumatic stress disorder, that his son's going to be that way. So it's kind of a generational novel as well, but it's also a love story between a father and a son.
Does your book ever touch on the fact that some veterans choose to self-medicate in their search to find out what's wrong with them? You know, even if they decide that, well, maybe my behavior or the things that I'm thinking aren't something that are conducive to a blending in with the society now that I'm out of country. Do you ever talk about the medication, the ups and downs of PTSD medication once you are diagnosed, or does it talk about the struggle to be properly diagnosed, especially, back in the 60s when there was no term called PTSD, or now, fast forward, many years in 2004 or 5, and where your story is set, in trying to get help?
Well, I think that one of the things that provides a unique perspective is a better understanding of how the VA system works. And Mike, wanting to save his marriage, he writes about war. That's what he is. He's a writer, an essayist. He works for a local newspaper, and he writes about war. And but his wife is insisting that he go beyond the writing, which gives him a distance in a way, and get back into therapy and medication. And so there are several poignant scenes of Mike being at the VA hospital and his observations of now a new generation of maimed and disfigured soldiers, along with his generation, which is in their 60s. And so there are several sessions that Mike's involved in with a therapist, doing talk therapy in a circle with veterans from both Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, expressing their viewpoints, which I think would be very helpful for anyone that is interested in how war impacts on veterans and their families, from a clinical standpoint. And that's where I think would provide medical professionals some unique insight.
In dealing with your own post-traumatic stress, are there times when, I guess for lack of a better term, you went into a relapse when you weren't using some of the tools that may have been given to you in your therapy? And do you address that in your novel as something that can happen to a vet who's been diagnosed and is taking steps to get a grip, at least as best as can be expected by himself, and then saying, you know what, maybe this isn't for me, and going back out and letting those thoughts run rampant again for a time?
Well, I'll just say that one of the ways that I have dealt with it over the years is when I've had a thought or a moment, or my mind starts to drift into that, I try to recognize it and stop it. It's like stop this cognitive behavior that's happening in my brain, and I'll say something that will get me out of that moment. And sometimes I think veterans like the moment. They like to think about that. And what would be good for a veteran, and certainly good for me, is to think back about the positive things that happened to you when you were in the war, the relationships that you generated, and just some positive things. There may only be, a very few of them, but like one time I remember when this little boy in the village came up to me for no reason and hugged me. Well, I hadn't touched anyone in a human way, in a loving way. The people that I'd been dealt with were dead or seriously wounded, and to have this child hug me as if he was my child is a moment I'll remember for the rest of my life.
Talk about some of the response that you've had from folks who have gotten a copy of your book. Your last work, I do believe, was highly critically acclaimed. Talk about some of the response that you've gotten from your latest work.
Well, what I've had is responses like this. I got an email from a veteran who said that he was in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that he kept my book with him because it helped him survive, my first book, A Field of Innocence, and that he was now reading A Soldier's Son, and he is experiencing all those things that Mike Kelly experienced as an older man. So, and I've had people comment about how it provides a realization that they never had about the impact on the psyche of war, and also some ways to deal with it on a personal level.
And where can our listeners get a copy of A Soldier's Son?
Well, you can get it through Ingram Sparks, which is the distributor, and you can tell your local bookstore. And you can also get it on Amazon.com. You can get it in Kindle version on Amazon, and you can buy it through Barnes & Noble. But if you have a favorite bookstore, just go to the bookstore, and they'll be able to, if they don't have it, they'll be able to order it. Most sales of books now take place online. So online's probably your quickest and best bet.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Jack. Thank you so much for coming in. And thank you so much for your service, too.
You bet you. Thank you.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. In studio this afternoon with Jack Estes, decorated Vietnam veteran, United States Marine, who served during some of the bloodiest years of the Vietnam War. He's the author of a brand new novel, A Soldier's Son, which was recently released, in the story about a father trying to help his son dealing with PTSD. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm, and you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.